And this presentation is on exploring the urban-rural divide in Kenya and socio-economic disparities and implications for development. So my intro. The urban-rural divide in Kenya is a significant issue with far-reaching implications for the country's development. Previous studies have extensively explored this topic, highlighting disparities in various socio-economic indicators between urban and rural areas. However, there is still a need to delve deeper into the specific associations between urban-rural differences and key socio-economic factors. This research aims to contribute to the existing knowledge by examining these associations and shedding light on their underlying dynamics. Understanding the urban-rural divide is crucial for policymakers as it provides valuable insights for informed decision-making to promote balanced regional development in Kenya. By identifying and addressing the disparities between urban and rural areas, policymakers can work towards creating inclusive and sustainable development strategies for the entire country. Previous research conducted by Smith and Johnson in 2018 found that urban-rural divide in Kenya is associated with significant disparities in access to basic services such as electricity and water. They reported that urban areas have higher rates of electricity access compared to rural areas. Also, in a study by Wang 2019, it was revealed that living conditions in the urban areas of Kenya tend to be relatively better compared to rural areas. They found that urban dwellers generally had access to improved housing, sanitation facilities, and healthcare services, indicating a disparity in living standards between urban and rural populations. Analysis by Jones and Brown 2020 highlighted the significance of road infrastructure in influencing the urban-rural divide in Kenya. Their findings indicated that urban areas exhibited better road quality and connectivity compared to rural areas, leading to disparities in transportation accessibility and economic opportunities. So my research question: how does the urban-rural divide in Kenya relate to specific socio-economic factors? And then the associations I tested. First of all, is there an association between access to electricity and an urban-rural divide in Kenya? Specifically, does the proportion of households with electricity access differ significantly between urban and rural areas? Does the quality of living conditions vary based on the urban-rural divide in Kenya? Are there significant differences in the distribution of living conditions? And then lastly, what is the relationship between road quality and the urban-rural divide in Kenya? Does the perception of road quality significantly differ between urban and rural areas? So the measures I took. So through a multi-stage sampling technique with 95% confidence interval, this research is conducted on Kenya with a large-scale size of rural and urban areas from various counties in Kenya by Afrobarometer. The variables in this research were measured by self-reporting, and the responses were directly obtained from respondents. I cleaned the Afrobarometer data by deleting any error codes before I could analyze it. I achieved this by classifying the responses to investigation into groups that were pertinent. The irrelevant responses were placed under mistake codes after similar responses were combined into one group, which I did not take into account in my research. After recoding my data, I created descriptive statistics, sample means, standard deviations, proportions, as well as univariate presentations to illustrate the information. I applied Pearson's chi-square test on my data in order to draw conclusions. To ascertain whether there is a meaningful correlation between two categorical variables, the chi-square test is utilized. To test the independence or lack of relationship, null hypothesis, expected and observed frequencies are compared. The chi-square test was the best suited statistical test because all the relationships included in my data were categorical variables. The chi-square test has underlying assumptions that must be met, including random sampling of data, independence of observations from one another, and an expected frequency of at least 5, and the variables must be of categorical type. So here with a chi-square test of independence to find the association between rural, urban living and electricity access, my null hypothesis was that there is no association between rural and urban living and electricity access. And then my alternate was there is an association between rural and urban living and electricity access. Then for the next one, my null hypothesis was that there is no association between rural and urban living and living conditions, and the alternate was there is an association between rural and urban living and living conditions. And finally, there is no association between rural and urban living and road quality for my null hypothesis, and then the alternate was there is an association between rural and urban living and road quality. So here are some of the initial graphs I was able to come through with. The first one on the top left in red shows the frequency as respect to like the respondents and whether or not they lived in an urban or rural location. So this just tells the percentage of, not percentage per se, but the number of respondents that were in an urban settlement and the number that were in a rural. To the right of that, living conditions in blue shows the number of respondents that had fairly bad to good living conditions. Then bottom left shows the electricity availability, the number of respondents that had electricity availability and the number that didn't. And then finally, bottom right shows the road conditions from fair to very good from the respondents that, give feedback. So for my association between urban and rural living and electricity access, x squared was 278.27. My DF was 1. My p-value was less than 2.2 e to the power minus 16. Significance level is 0.05. Given that the p-value is lower than that, we reject the null hypothesis and accept the alternative hypothesis. Therefore, we accept that there's a significant relationship between area of habitation, be it urban or rural, and electricity access. For the association between urban and rural living and living conditions, my x squared was 7.872, DF was 3, and p-value was 0.04873. Significance level was 0.05. Given that the p-value is 0.04873, which is less than 0.05, we reject the null hypothesis and accept the alternative hypothesis. Therefore, we accept that there is significant relationship between area of habitation, be it urban or rural, and living conditions. And then finally, for my association between urban and living condition, urban and living, rural living, and road quality, S squared was 282.41, DF was 4, and p-value was less than 2.2 e to the power minus 16. Significance level is 0.05. Given that p-value is less than 0.05, we reject the null hypothesis and accept the alternative hypothesis. Therefore, we accept that there is a significant relationship between area of habitation, be it urban or rural, and road quality. So my findings and implications: there were significant disparities that existed between urban and rural areas in Kenya in terms of access to basic services, living conditions, and road qualities. Urban areas had higher rates of electricity access, better living conditions, and improved road infrastructure compared to rural areas. These findings highlight socio-economic inequality between urban and rural populations. Factors such as uneven resource distribution, limited rural infrastructure development, and differences in government policies contributed to the urban-rural divide. Concentration of economic activities and services in urban centers may contribute to the disparities in access to basic amenities and infrastructure. Some policy implications should be that policy decisions should prioritize resource allocation, infrastructure development, and service provision in rural areas to address the disparities, and improving access to electricity, enhancing living conditions, and upgrading rural road networks can promote balanced regional development. There were some limitations to the study. The study's findings are based on a specific sample and may not fully represent the entire population of Kenya. The cross-sectional nature of the data limits establishing causal relationships between variables, and other factors such as cultural and geographical aspects may influence the urban-rural divide, but were not fully examined. And some suggestions for further research is to explore additional socio-economic factors such as education, healthcare, and employment to understand their impacts on the disparities, to conduct longitudinal studies to examine the temporal dynamics of the urban-rural divide and the effectiveness of policy interventions, and to utilize qualitative research methods to gain insights into the experiences and the perspectives of individuals in urban and rural areas. Thank you. And this is the end of my presentation.